you guys before we head out for spring break and for me, my leave of absence. So hope you guys watch this. Hope you make it. Sorry for the late release today. It's been kind of a busy day, a lot of emails, a lot of meetings, and trying to get more information about what's going to happen moving forward. On Thursday, our state superintendent, Tony Thurman, announced that we're probably not going to be going back to school. So even though it's not an official announcement from the district yet, the higher ups of the state are thinking that's what's best. And I think I'd have to agree with that, but that also means that a lot of stuff we're looking forward to is not really going to happen. So there's probably going to be more that's going to come out in the next couple of days. I would expect by the end of the week you'll probably get another email from the school and get some updates on that. So the plus side is next week's spring break. So even though we're not really going anywhere, hopefully you enjoy the break from all the work and however you maybe start making a plan for the next week, so you have something to work on. Well, let's jump right into it. Today we're going to be looking at chapter 46, which is animal reproduction, and it's a fun one. I really enjoy this one, not just because it's about sex, but it's just fascinating to get into the details of something that we're all pretty familiar with at a superficial level, but we actually get to dive into some of the deeper things today. So we'll take a look at the different types of reproduction out there, go over some basic anatomy and physiology of the male and female reproductive systems, and talk through pregnancy a little bit, which is very, very relevant to me right now. So let me switch over and get started. So this is chapter 46 on animal reproduction, and let's begin with the different types. So as you know, there's asexual and sexual reproduction. Just a quick review with you. Asexual reproduction has pros and cons. Right? The pro is that you don't really need a partner to reproduce, so you're basically guaranteed to have offspring. The downside of that is because there's a lack of meiosis and random fertilization. You don't really have a lot of genetic variation. And there's a couple different types that we see in nature. One is from bacteria. They do a version of mitosis called binary fission, and that's what allows bacteria to grow so quickly. They basically just split themselves into two. We also have something called budding, and some animals, early invertebrates, but also plants can do this, where they basically just grow like an offshoot, kind of creating a new individual organism off to the side, and that'll eventually break off or bud off and become two separate individuals. But of course, again, this means that they're going to be genetically identical. The third one is fragmentation, and you may have heard of worms. If you can cut them, that they can regenerate their parts, or that it'll grow into two worms. And it's not that simple, but some species of segmented worms have the ability to regenerate from their different parts. And so I guess technically, if you cut these particular worms in half, each half could grow into another. Again, they would be identical. And then you have regeneration, which is not really like a form of reproduction. It just is a way of growing parts back. And that's really less about reproduction and more just about having stem cells that can redifferentiate into whatever body part it's missing. So in this case, the sea star, I think, is growing a larva, and lizards can also grow the tail. So asexual organisms are generally going to be pretty isolated because they don't need to mate, and so they can kind of live on their own or in a colony. And the ecological perspective of this is because they don't need a partner, they can reproduce really, really quickly. So generally speaking, they're going to have a lot of offspring in a very short amount of time because it doesn't require as much of an investment. Now with sexual reproduction, obviously this means that you're going to have two cells, two gametes that come from two different individuals, and they're going to join together to make a zygote. And for that to be possible, the genetic content has to be that the haploid, they have half the number of chromosomes, and that way the zygote ends up having two chromosomes. Some kind of strange versions of sexual reproduction include hermaphroditism. That is where an organism like a worm is going to have both male and female parts. It does not mean that they can reproduce with themselves. They still want to find a mate, because if they reproduce with themselves, they might as well just use asexual reproduction. And so they're not going to go through all the effort of making sperm and eggs just to reproduce asexually. So they still need to have a partner. You can also, there's some weird things, actually not weird, but different things. One's called parthenogenesis, and this is where individuals can actually change their sex if needed. And we talked a little bit about this in the genetics unit, but there are genes like the SRY gene, one of them, that actually regulate your biological sex. And in some cases, if the population is skewed too heavy with too many males or too many females, in some species, individuals can turn certain hormones on that then instruct the nucleus to switch genes on and off. And in this case, this fish here can actually change its gender. I don't remember if it's male to female or female to male, but anyways, they can change their gender so that they can have a better chance of reproducing. Now, for sexual reproduction to happen, you have to have fertilization. That's the union of sperm and eggs. But there's two types. You can have external fertilization, which is what we see with a lot of fish. And actually, you can kind of see in the background with these frogs too, is that they are going to basically lay their eggs, and then the other partner is the male is going to spray the sperm directly onto the eggs. So there's not really any penetration in terms of like penises and vaginas there. And it's pretty efficient because the mom doesn't have to be pregnant, right, with external fertilization. So she doesn't have to like save up energy or space to be able to carry her young. And so the result of that is both the males and the females are going to produce a lot more gametes, and they can, basically put out a lot of zygotes all at once. Now the trade-off here is because it's externalized. Once the eggs are laid, the parents can't really do too much to protect them, and so there's going to be fewer surviving offspring. Now on the flip side, you have internal fertilization, and that's an adaptation to land, right? Because when you go into land, remember, water is harder to find, and eggs can dry out. And so one strategy is to have fertilization take place inside, and that keeps the eggs and the sperm from drying out, and you end up having a better chance of survival. The trade-off there, though, is that you're going to have fewer gametes and fewer offspring, right? Because it's going to take more energy, and it's going to take more parental care. So we see that as animals evolve onto land. Okay. And of course that also comes with more parental care. So as we move on to land, you're going to see more and more animals caring for their young, feeding them, and for mammals even producing breast milk. And what that does is, because you're having fewer offspring, you're going to do what it takes to ensure higher survivorship. It increases the ability of the offspring to make it. So it's kind of a trade-off. In ecology, we call these K-type and R-type strategies. The ones that have a lot of offspring but fewer survive and there's very little parental care, that's called an R-type survivorship curve. And the one that has fewer offspring but more parental care, that's called a K-type. And we'll walk through more of that after the break. So in general, with gamete production and delivery, what you need are organs called the gonads. And the gonads are the organs that produce and store the gametes. So in human terms, this is going to be the ovaries and the testicles. Now these are not just like a little, people think of like testes or ovaries as just like a little sac that there's sperm inside, but it's actually really, really complex inside. You have a lot of different tubes that are folded back and forth that create a lot of surface area. And those tubes and glands end up producing and storing all these gametes and nourish them. And a lot of gametes, like you don't just go through meiosis and they're done. As we're going to see with both sperm and eggs, there's a process where the division happens, but then there's a maturation process where they actually have to, grow more parts, like the flagella for the sperm, or the eggs actually have to develop and start producing hormones. So the gametes are not just a place where gametes are made; it's also where they're going to be nourished and develop and be protected before they are actually released. some cases, the gonads are also going to house the developing embryos. And by this, I don't necessarily mean like the actual ovary, but the structures associated with the ovary, like the uterus, is going to house and provide a place for the offspring to grow. And that's really what we're going to talk about today. So let's start with the female reproductive structure. This is obviously, the pictures you see are human, but this is pretty consistent with most animals. So the female reproductive structure is focused on the egg, right? It's all about making the egg, storing the eggs, releasing the egg, a process we call ovulation. So when a female animal is ovulating, that means that the egg has been released by the ovary, and that is going to be the time when pregnancy can take place, so fertilization can take place. We'll talk more about follicles in the next couple slides, so don't worry about that for now. Speaking of housing the embryo, the uterus is where that's going to take place. And the uterus is I've learned a lot about the uterus in the past 9 months with my wife being pregnant. But it's not just a room for the embryo to grow. It's also a place for a lot of the blood and nutrient and gas exchange to take place. It's also really important as a muscle in the actual birth process. And so the uterus, if you look at it from the side view here, just to kind of give you a little bit of anatomy. So this part here is to the right side. This is anterior, so this is towards the front. Okay, so here you can see that this is the pubic bone, and the opening right here, this is the vagina. And at the back of the vagina, you have this little opening called the cervix. And we'll see this at the end, but the cervix is what's going to eventually dilate. You may have heard of that when women go through labor, that little hole is going to dilate all the way up to 10 centimeters for that baby to come out. And on the other side of the uterus, what you have of the cervix, this is the uterus right here. It's a muscular organ that will grow and stretch during pregnancy and then start to contract during the childbirth process to push the baby out the cervix and out the vagina. And then this is kind of a frontal view. So again, here's the vagina, here's the cervix, here's the uterus. And attached to the uterus on both sides are these tubes called fallopian tubes that lead to the ovaries. And so women have 2 ovaries that produce eggs. They release those during ovulation, and then those eggs travel down, and if they get fertilized, they'll implant into the uterus. Now, what they implant into is a really thick layer of highly vascularized tissue. What that means is that they have a lot of blood vessels going there, and that structure is called the endometrium. The endometrium is what is going to nourish that embryo, that zygote, in the early stages as the amniotic sac and the placenta develop. Now, if the woman does not get pregnant, the endometrium does get shed every month, and that is where we get the menstrual cycle or your period from. It's the shedding of this layer within the uterus. How the uterus knows whether to shed the endometrium or not is it's all about communication. And you can probably guess what kind of communication it's going to be, mainly with hormones. So everything we talked about in the previous chapter about hormones playing an important role, we're going to see that a lot in this chapter. Finally, we have the vagina, which is the very, very bottom right here, and that is where the sperm is going to be deposited. That's also going to serve as the birth canal. So these are here, but so that's the female reproductive system. Kind of the big picture here, but there's a lot of stuff going on inside here. Just some other structures to point out for those of you that are not familiar. This channel right here is the vagina, but then slightly above it, you see a smaller tube. That is the urethra, and that leads to this sac right here, which is the bladder. And of course, that's where the urine is going to be collected and stored before the process of fertilization. Towards the posterior region, towards the back, we have the anus right here. This is leading up into the large intestine. So this is where this is out. And then the area in between, that's called the perineum. And again, most conversations, we don't really care about perineum much, but during childbirth, that is a big topic of discussion because this is the area that is going to go through a lot of stress because all this needs to move out of the way. Pushed towards the back and the front as the baby's going to So I had my eyes open to a whole range of products, perinatal products that are used in the postpartum process and birth. There's a lot of perineal care that hormones are found inside the breast. These are sacs that are made out of epithelial tissue. Remember, epithelial tissue is tissue made from the epithelial cells, which are the cells that make up linings of containers for our body. Right? So these sacs are lined with epithelial tissues, and these tissues essentially act as like a sweat gland does. They can secrete water and minerals and also a lot of fats and proteins into ducts that then open up into the nipple. And around that is going to be fatty adipose tissue that forms as a hormonal response to estrogen. This is the reason why when women go through puberty, when girls go through puberty, one of the early signs that the breast tissue increases in size is because as estrogen levels increase in the body, the fat cells, the adipose cells here, are going to grow and start to store up fats. The purpose of that is to store nutrients so that breast milk can be produced. So when the time comes to produce that milk, all of that is regulated through, again, hormones. And if you watch the chapter 45 lecture on the endocrine system, you know that there are two hormones involved in the production of milk. Those are oxytocin and prolactin. And the two really work together to ensure that the baby's got a continuous supply of milk. And again, all these hormones are subject to negative feedback loops and positive feedback loops to keep that milk going for the baby. So that's the female side. On the male side, I don't want to say it's a lot simpler, but we don't have to house a baby, so in some ways it is simpler. The male gonads, as you know, are called the testes, and inside the testicles, you can kind of see in the diagram here, you can see there's a lot of folding in there, and again, the purpose of that is to increase your surface area, to give you more space for the sperm to grow. And the reason for that is because the sperm are actually going to develop within the walls of these folds. They divide, and then their heads are kind of buried in there, and then the tail kind of comes out of that wall, and then they become more mobile, and then they kind of back themselves out, and then they're able to release during ejaculation. So those tubes right there, those are called seminal interface tubes. And in general, sperm production does require cooler temperatures, which is why, unlike the ovaries, the testes are located outside the body, housed in a sac called the scrotum. You have a tube called the epididymis. This is where the sperm are actually going to mature. So remember, I told you that the testes produce the sperm, but they're not necessarily going to stay there the whole time. So when they're mature, they're going to be stored in this region right here, kind of on the outside, called the epididymis. And this tube eventually is going to lead, if you follow it all the way up, it's going to go up above the bladder, drop around, and then it's going to join the urethra and head to the penis, where the sperm is not during ejaculation. Now, as that tube travels from the testes to the penis, there are three glands that are connected to the epididymis through this duct. The Van Deferens, that's the name of the but if you zoom into the picture here, you can see that there are these glands, okay, that are connected by ducts that drain into the urethra, and you can kind of trace that all the way back to the testes. And so basically, as the sperm are moving through this set of tubes, of these three glands, which I'll talk about right now, that's going to be the seminal vesicles, the prostate gland, and the urethral gland. These three glands are going to secrete different fluids to join the sperm, and that's going to make a sticky substance called semen. So semen is not exactly the same thing as sperm. Okay, semen contains sperm, but it also contains a number of other things. So what do they add? Well, seminal vesicles add mucus, right, just to give you a fluid for that sperm to sit in so it doesn't dry out. It does provide sugar because the sperm have to swim. So yes, they do cell respiration. They make ATP, and that's going to power the swimming of the gamete cells. And also contains a hormone called prostaglandin. And prostaglandin is actually it causes muscles to contract. And so it's actually used during childbirth, but also during sex. When the semen is released, the prostaglandins can actually cause the uterus itself to contract. What that does is it kind of squeezes the sperm upwards towards the fallopian tubes and increases the likelihood of fertilization. The prostate gland is this little one right here. It also what's it called? produces nutrients for the sperm. And then the vulvarethral gland is a small gland that neutralizes the acidic urine. Because we use the same tube for urine as the sperm, the urine can be slightly acidic because of that urea. And so the vulvarethral gland releases kind of a basic substance that will neutralize some of that urine before the sperm. So that's the male reproductive system. Okay. Now, let's skip over this part. This is really just about the process of sex. But coitus is the technical term for having sex. And ultimately, what's going to happen is during coitus is that the sperm is released through ejaculation. The uterus is going to contract because of the prostaglandin, and there's all kinds of muscle contractions happening both in the male and the female. That's called myotonia, and the goal is basically to push that sperm upwards into the uterus so that we can have fertilization. Okay, so let's get into the real interesting stuff now, which is how the gametes actually develop. So let's start with the ladies. What the ovary does is a process called oogenesis, and the word O is referring to the egg. So you're going to see and hear that word a lot: oogonia, oogenesis, oocyte. So the oogonia is the ovary stem cells. These are also referred to as germ cells that are found inside the ovary. These are the cells, the oogonium, that are going to be destined to become an egg. And so you can see in this picture here, the oogonium is a diploid cell that is going to go through mitosis to make many, many, many oogonia. But when it comes time to make the egg, the oogonium is going to start to go through meiosis 1 and eventually meiosis 2. Okay? And at that point, when it starts to go through meiosis, it's going to go from an oogonium to an oocyte. Okay? And during that process, one cell is going to divide into two. Now you notice both cells don't become eggs. One is going to become the cell called a polar body. That's not really going to be used. It's just removed. But the secondary oocyte, this is the one that's going to go through meiosis 2. Okay? And so when it goes through meiosis 2, then again, it makes a second polar body, which is discarded, and all the cytoplasm and the mitochondria and all the cellular contents are channeled into the single cell here called the ovum, and that's also known as the egg. And so what you have is that haploid cell called the ovum. This is also the reason why your mitochondria are all from your mom, because all the mitochondria, for the gamete is going to come from this process of pushing all the cellular contents into this single ovum. Okay? So unlike sperm, which do make 4 gametes per set of meiosis, ladies you're only going to make 1 egg. Okay? Now, in terms of pictures, this is what it looks like when you're going through that process. Okay? So here in your ovary, you have an oogonium, and they are going to develop while you're in your mother's womb. You're going to develop and start that process of meiosis and develop into that primary oocyte. And so by the time you're born, I believe the ovaries are already full of these oocytes, basically all the ones that you would ever need in your life. Now, of course, that's not going to be a usable egg yet, because the egg has to mature as we go through a secondary oocyte and ovum stages. So meiosis 2 still needs to complete. You're born with all these eggs, okay, these incomplete eggs, and then when puberty kicks in and the hormones start being turned on and released, those hormones will tell the ovary to begin getting the egg ready. Another word for it is maturing. The hormones will tell the follicle that is housing the egg to mature, and then we'll have ovulation. I got a little bit ahead of myself here. The primary oocyte is that tiny little dot here. Okay, that's what's going to become the egg, but it's surrounded by a larger cell called a follicle. And the follicle is kind of like an extra layer of housing for the egg, and it protects it and it helps facilitate its growth, because the follicle itself can make hormones. But also what's really important is even after ovulation is going to happen, you'll notice the way it happens is it's kind of like exocytosis. That whole follicle is going to move towards the edge of that ovary, and it's going to fuse with it, and that egg, that secondary oocyte, is going to be ovulated. It's going to get pushed out. But the follicle that's ruptured stays behind, and then it develops into something called the corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum literally just means yellow body, because it has this yellowish appearance. But even after the egg has been released and it's traveling down that fallopian tube, the corpus luteum is actually super important, because it's going to be cranking out tons of hormones to to let the woman's body know, hey, the egg's been released. We need to get ready for potential pregnancy. And so a lot of the early stages of pregnancy are all regulated by the corpus luteum. And then after a while, it degenerates and it breaks down and it goes away. And then the next month, this whole cycle starts again, where we pick another primary oocyte, we have it grow in that follicle and mature, we release the egg, and then the corpus luteum does its thing. So that is kind of what's happening on a monthly basis in the female reproductive system. So here are some written words, some points for you here. So the oogonia use mitosis. It's probably a little bit more detail than you need to worry about, but the secondary oocyte is going to form during puberty with the instructions of a hormone called FSH, which, if you remember, comes from your pituitary gland. So your brain is actually telling your ovary, ladies, that it's time to start puberty and it's time to start maturing those oocytes from the primary to the secondary oocyte. Something kind of cool, by the way, that I don't want to skip is, ladies, because your eggs are developing in utero. What this means, right? By in utero, I mean when you were in your mother's womb. It's kind of a beautiful picture that there was a moment in time where you and your future offspring and your parents, their grandparents, so 3 generations are in the same body at the same time, right? Because if you think about it, when your grandmother was pregnant with your mom, her ovaries were already making you, making the eggs that make you. So there's that moment in time where you're in your mom as she's in your grandmother, and you're all there. Which is kind of cool. Anyways, so the secondary oocyte, as I mentioned, does not finish all the way with meiosis. It actually stops specifically at metaphase 2, and then once a month, when the egg is ready to be released, that one cell will be selected. It'll finish metaphase, anaphase, telophase, and then we get the actual egg, and then we have okay. And then during the process of fertilization, meiosis is actually am I getting this mixed up? Oh, sorry. When it's ovulated, it's still stopped at metaphase 2, but it finishes it when it comes in contact with the sperm. Okay, and as I mentioned, the follicle develops in the corpus luteum. Now, on the guy's side, I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because it's pretty straightforward. You can see from the picture here that we have one sperm. This is your germ cell, the spermatogonium, and that one sperm cell is going to give rise to 4 haploid sperm cells down here. Okay? The name we use for these this is the spermatogonium, and then they're going to divide into spermicites, primary and secondary spermicites, kind of depending on what stage of development they're in. And of course, all this is going to happen in the seminiferous tubes. So if you look at the cross section of a testicle, there are all these tubes that are coiled back and forth, and then the inside of these tubes, that's where you see all this happening. So this is kind of how it works. Okay, it starts kind of from the outside edge of the tube, where the spermatogonium is, and then as they develop and go through meiosis, these cells are going to migrate and eventually make 4 cells, which are these secondary spermatocytes, which will then kind of sit inside the walls of the tube. And then, as I told you earlier, the tails will kind of develop out of that, and then as they back out, now you have the 4 sperm that come from that single spermatogonium. Now, because the testes are so highly folded, you have millions and millions of these spermatogonium, and that's the reason why males can produce sperm so quickly, on average 200 to 300 million per day. So that's basically how sperm are made. Here's a little anatomy of a sperm. Here's the head. At the very front, there's a little packet of enzymes called an acrosome. That's going to be is what allows for the sperm to actually dissolve the outer coating of the egg and allow it to burrow inside. Here you have the head, where you find the nucleus. That's where you're going to have all your, well, not all, but 23 of your chromosomes that you want to give to your kid. And then behind that is, actually it's kind of funny, there's a whole stack of mitochondria here, and their sole job there is to take that sugar in, break it down and make ATP. And why do they want ATP? Because they got to whip this whole thing back and forth. That's the tail. And there's actually all these kinds of proteins inside that allow it to whip back and forth. So that is kind of the quick version of how sperm are going to form. Of course, this doesn't happen until you hit puberty. And then when the sperm are they're going to be stored in the epididymis, which is kind of that tube on the outside, and that's when they actually become motile, where they can start to move around. And then we've talked through some of the sperm structures. The main ones are the acrosome, the mitochondria, and of course, don't forget the actual DNA that's inside, and the flagella that's used for movement. Okay. So there are obviously quite some differences between oogenesis and spermatogenesis, and here are kind of the main three differences. One is cytokinesis is unequal, right? In females, we saw that all the cytoplasm ends up in just one of the 4 daughter cells, which is going to become the egg, whereas in sperm, they are pretty even in their distribution. Secondly, unlike sperm, eggs are not produced continuously through life. You may have heard of something called menopause. I can't remember exactly the number, but it's somewhere in the book. I have to look it up. But ladies, you only have so many cycles that you are kind of pre-programmed to go through. And so when women hit a certain age, in their 50s or 60s, they go through something called menopause, where basically everything shuts down. They're not releasing eggs anymore. They're not able to get pregnant. And that has its own set of symptoms. Whereas men, you're going to make sperm throughout your entire life. And oogenesis has long resting periods in the sense that it happens on a monthly cycle, whereas sperm are produced in an uninterrupted sequence. Basically, from the moment you start puberty all the way till the time you die, you're going to be making those sperm. Okay. Now, here's the part that I find so fascinating, and I know you guys are like, "This is so weird. Why are you saying that the menstrual cycle is fascinating?" I'm not fascinated with the details of like what happens during. Well, I guess this is what happens in menstruation. The point I'm trying to get at is that up to now, most of you, including you ladies, probably just know that the menstrual cycle is related to ovulation, okay, and that you know the endometrium is being shed. That's nothing new. What I want to share with you today, though, is how that cycle is synced with the rest of your body, and how the whole body coordinates this process behind the menstrual cycle, and why it's on this like 28-day cycle. And to understand that, you have to look at the difference between the menstrual versus the estrous cycle. So in the menstrual cycle, this is the cycle that your body goes through if you're not getting pregnant. That's going to require that the endometrium is shed, and sexual receptivity is not limited to a certain time frame. So that basically just means that, I'm kind of mixing this up. Oh, okay, sorry, my bad. So this sentence here is kind of misleading, because it is, sexual receptivity is limited to a time frame, because you can't always get pregnant. That's what kind of confused me. What we're comparing this with is other mammals that go through the estrous cycle. Okay, and so humans go through the menstrual cycle, but other animals, you may have heard of like a dog that goes into heat. That's an estrous cycle. And the difference between that is, with the sexual receptivity, is a dog is not going to be receptive to sexual activity every single month like a human is. Okay, that's what we mean by a limited time frame. So there might be certain seasons of the year where they go into heat, and that's when the females are going to let the guys know that they're interested in reproducing. In addition to that, the endometrium is actually, in some species, is reabsorbed by the uterus. That's a way just to preserve nutrients, because when you shed that endometrium, you're losing a lot of blood, you're losing a lot of iron, a lot of nutrients, and in estrus animals, they're able to reabsorb that and use that. Now, in both cases, the endometrium is going to thicken, right, in this cycle to get ready for fertilization and implantation. And what sets it off is the process of ovulation. And that brings us to another cycle, which is the ovulation cycle. So here's the picture that really is, I don't know, it sounds weird, but this is one of my favorite diagrams in the book, because it just shows how beautifully choreographed the female reproductive system is when it comes to regulating the process of pregnancy. And so I'm going to take you through this kind of step by step to kind of, and I may jump around a little bit just to kind of show you how it's all related. So what I want to do is begin with the ovarian cycle. Okay, this is the cycle that's happening in the ovaries, and this is what we talked about earlier, of like taking one of those eggs and maturing it as the follicle is going to grow and mature. And so here's the process of ovulation. You can see this dotted line represents the day that the follicle is going to rupture and release that mature egg into the fallopian tubes. Okay? And you can see after that, the follicle again turns into the corpus luteum, which over time is going to degenerate. So from the beginning to the end here, this is the ovarian cycle. Now, how is this regulated? Well, you see the arrows pointing to it, right? The arrows, there's a brown arrow here and a black arrow here. Those arrows represent two hormones called FSH and LH. And if you remember from chapter 45, FSH and LH are released from the brain, from the pituitary gland. So the brain is actually the one that's responsible for telling the ovaries to go through this cycle. Okay? But it's not just that simple, because the anterior pituitary gland has to get its instructions from the hypothalamus. And so the hypothalamus releases its own hormone called GnRH, or gonadotropin releasing hormone. And so ultimately the hypothalamus is what's in charge of puberty and also the reproductive cycle. Now, fun fact, when couples are trying to get pregnant, and believe me, when I don't know what it is like when you're younger, everyone's just telling you like don't get pregnant, but when you're older, you're actually trying, it's not that easy. And so one of the things that a lot of ladies can do is you can buy ovulation test strips. You might have seen this on TV shows. They actually sell them really cheap on Amazon now. I know this because we bought them. What that test strip does is it tests for LH levels. So the ladies will pee on it. Your urine's going to have some level of hormones in there. And when the LH levels are high, that tells you that you're ovulating. Now, why is that? Because the way that the ovaries know to release the egg at this time is by listening to both LH and FSH. And especially you can see LH really spikes up right before that dotted line, which means the day or two before you're going to ovulate and release that egg, your LH levels are going to be really, really high. And so the way those test strips work is, you basically on day one you're like peeing on that strip, nothing's happening, no color's changing. But then as we get closer to like 2 days before the egg is released, you're gonna start to see like little colored bands show up, and that means that LH levels are high, which means within the next 48 hours an egg is gonna be released. Immediately after that, you can see both LH and FSH are gonna drop. Okay, and that's because the egg has already been released. So the pituitary gland has done its job in like coordinating the release of that egg. Okay, so that's kind of the first half of this process, is the communication between the brain and the ovaries right here. Okay, now think about this from an objective purpose or objective standpoint. When that egg is released, if there is a sperm that is going to fertilize that egg and the zygote's going to form, what does the body need to have ready to receive that zygote, right? Ready to receive that embryo? And the answer is the endometrium. The endometrium needs to, at this point, be at its thickest or close to its thickest so that it can receive that zygote and start to nourish it with oxygen and nutrients and everything it needs to grow and survive. So that is what you see here at the very bottom. Okay, here's the endometrium. And here are the days, by the way. I forgot to give you the scale. I know it's kind of hard to see, but so you can see that at the bottom, here's day 0, okay, the very, very first day, and down here, there's day 28. So if you didn't know, this whole cycle runs on a 28-day cycle. On days 1 through 5, what you're actually doing is this is the menstrual flow phase. So this is when the body is shedding that endometrium from the previous cycle, assuming that pregnancy didn't occur. At day 5, though, the endometrium is going to respond to what's going on in the ovaries up above by starting to thicken. Okay, and you can see by the time it thickens and we get into the day of ovulation, which is day 14, in the days to come there, the endometrium is going to be pretty much at its thickest point. It's ready to receive that baby. Now, if it doesn't, if pregnancy does not happen, then what's going to happen is the endometrium is going to realize through a lack of hormones that the pregnancy didn't take place. And what will happen then is at day 28, it'll begin to shed it, and that will then send the body back to the very beginning of the next cycle, where over the next 5 days, we go through the menstrual period. And that's when you shed them. Okay. Now, what's the relationship between what's happening in the ovaries and the egg and the endometrium? Well, it's through a second set of hormones, and this time that hormone is all released by the follicle. And that, guys, is the purpose of the follicle. Okay, if you were wondering, like, I thought this was about the egg. Why do we have this follicle? Why does it have to mature? Why does it turn into corpus luteum? The job of the follicle is to actually produce two really important hormones. You've heard of these, called estrogen and progesterone. And what estrogen and progesterone do is that as the egg is being matured and released, the estrogen and progesterone are communicating with the endometrium in the uterus to tell the uterus to start getting ready for that egg to be received. So you can see right before the egg is released, there's going to be a surge, right, of estrogen. That's actually related to the surge of LH being released by the pituitary gland. But then after the ovulation process takes place, the corpus luteum is going to actually increase the amount of progesterone that is being made, and that's going to directly communicate along with the estrogen to promote the thickening of the endometrium. Okay? Now keep in mind, just because the ovulation, the egg is released on day 14 doesn't mean you get pregnant at day 14. The egg's going to take a couple of days to move down that fallopian tube towards the uterus, and if that woman has sex with her partner and the sperm show up at that time, then fertilization is going to happen. So most likely, even though this is day 14, the implantation is not really going to happen until we get to about day 16 through day 20, because the sperm can live several days inside the body as well. So that's kind of the hope. If you're trying to get pregnant, you're keeping track of all these different hormones, and you're making sure that the egg is being released at the right time, and that the uterus is ready to receive that egg or that zygote by the time fertilization happens. And how it happens is through all these hormones. Okay, for the second part of it, it's estrogen and progesterone. For this first step of it, it's LH, FSH, along with gonadotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus. And so when we zoom out, you can get a pretty good picture. Even though like there's a lot going on here, if you just use this dotted line as a reference, you can see that all these different things that's happening in the brain, in the ovaries, and in the uterus, they're all synced up and choreographed so that everything happens at the same time. Okay? Now, sometimes the cycle can be a little bit off. Days they don't have to be 28 days. Some women have shorter cycles, some have longer cycles. And other times, because of genetics and other factors, the hormones aren't always released at the right amount or at the right time, and that can cause irregular cycles. And that's why a lot of women, even if they're not trying to get pregnant, they may be taking birth control pills, because that birth control pill can actually help to regulate and normalize some of these cycles. By the way, a lot of birth control pills actually have really high levels of progesterone and or estrogen. And why does it do that? Why do we have that? Because if you're taking a pill that has a lot of estrogen and progesterone, you're basically tricking the uterus into thinking that you've already ovulated, right? So if you're taking birth control, the endometrium stays thick, you don't shed it, so you actually either skip periods or you don't get a period at all. And then the result of that is, through negative feedback, the brain gets a message saying, if we have a lot of estrogen and progesterone, that means the brain thinks, oh, we're pregnant right now. And so if we're pregnant, it's not going to trigger the release of FSH and LH, which means that the egg doesn't get released. And so if a woman's not sexually active, or she is sexually active but she's taking birth control, the likelihood of getting pregnant is going to be lower, because ovulation is not going to take place. Okay, because you're essentially hacking the brain by adding extra chemicals. So that's kind of a gist of how the female reproductive cycles work, and there's a lot to take in there. This is in your textbook, so you can check it out. But guys, especially guys, I think it's important for us to understand this, because even though we're not the ones getting pregnant, you'll learn this one day, and I'm in the middle of this all, that your partners really, really appreciate when you take the time to understand what's going on with their body, especially as they're the ones that are going through all the aches and pains and the birth pains. The least you can do is educate yourself on what's happening, so that you can sympathize, that you can be an advocate for her throughout the whole pregnancy and process. And ladies, I hope this helps you understand a little bit better of what's going on inside of you too. I think a lot of this seems like a big mystery, and they certainly don't cover this in sex ed when you're in 5th grade or even in health class. So it's just kind of cool to understand what's going on in there, and that way when things don't go as planned, where it's like you're having trouble getting pregnant one day, or you want to not get pregnant, you can kind of understand like where all those, why all those medications or whatever are working the way that they do. So that's the female reproductive cycle. Pretty cool. Now, I know I didn't give you all these points. I'll give it to you now. You can pause it if you'd like. Fun fact here, menopause happens about after 465 cycles. So you're programmed to hit that number, and after that, all this starts to shut down, and then you don't have babies anymore. I'm not really going to go over this part too much, because guys, we do release hormones too. We do use LH and FSH. It's not as complicated. Basically, we release LH, FSH, and that triggers the release of testosterone from a cell called the Leydig cells in your testes, and then that's what triggers both the development of sperm and your secondary sex characteristics. Let's see. This is all about conception. We kind of already talked about this. You can pause it and read up on your own if you like. Post-implantation, another hormone that's kind of interesting is there's a hormone called HCG, which is human chorionic gonadotropin hormone. And this is a fun one to know, because if you are trying to get pregnant, or if you're not trying to get pregnant, either way, you're going to be probably taking a pregnancy test. And what pregnancy tests do is they tell you whether or not you're pregnant by measuring the presence of a hormone, and that hormone is HCG. Now, HCG is not actually made by the mother, it's made by the zygote. So when that zygote has gone through a certain number of divisions and it's implanted itself in the endometrium, it's going to start to crank out really high levels of HCG. It actually increases more and more and more and more. And what that does is that's the way of the baby communicating with the mom to say, hey mom, I'm growing now, and that's going to actually cause the corpus luteum to make even more progesterone and estrogen and keep those progesterone and estrogen levels high. And so there's a way of communicating between mom and baby now, so that the pregnancy can be coordinated. Now, if there is no HCG, okay, because pregnancy did not happen, then that's what's going to cause menstruation. That's what's going to cause the endometrium to shed, and then we go back to day 0 of the cycle. And again, as I mentioned, this is what's being detected by most pregnancy tests. And by the way, they're really cheap on Amazon. Okay, if you go to like CVS, you might have to pay like $10, $15, $20 for one pregnancy test, but on Amazon you can get like they're $1 each. So when we found out we were pregnant, I think we like couldn't believe it, so we just did like 8 of them, and it only cost $8. So pro tip for the very, 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 very far future for you. Okay, a few things about the placenta. I'm gonna kind of wrap it up around here, because you can read up on pregnancy, but this video is getting to almost 50 minutes, so I wanted to shut this down. The last thing that's really cool about the placenta is, remember, as the baby is developing now, it is on the mom's body to provide everything, all those important inputs for the baby, right? Providing oxygen, nutrients, sugars, proteins, fats, but also carrying away waste. And the way that exchange happens is through this organ called the placenta. Now, a lot of people confuse the placenta with the uterus. Okay, remember, the uterus is this whole muscle. It's a big bag that is housing the baby. And then if we zoom in a little bit, you can see that there's a sac. This is called the amniotic sac. That's filled with water. They call it the bag of waters. And that's what's going to, when the bag breaks, right, and the water breaks, that is an early indicator that, the baby's going to be ready to deliver. Now, in between this bag and the uterus, there's this whole structure here called the placenta. And that is a very highly vascularized area where there's an exchange between the mom's blood and the baby's blood. So here's the umbilical cord. We're going to zoom in, and we can see it in this picture at the bottom. There's the umbilical cord, right? So from the baby's veins and arteries are going to go up the umbilical cord, and they're going to branch out into all these little capillary beds, right? And remember, capillary beds have very high surface area. That's where all the exchange is going to happen. Now, over here, this is the mom's blood. This is the maternal arteries and maternal veins. So the arteries are bringing mom's blood to the placenta, and it's actually draining that blood into all the space that is bathing all these capillary beds from the umbilical cord. Okay, so the idea with this is, let's just pay attention to just gas exchange. Okay, so the baby needs oxygen, the baby's making CO2, the mom's doing all the breathing, right? Remember, baby's in this bag, the lungs aren't working, it's not doing any oxygenation or gas exchange. So the mom is doing all the breathing, and so the mom's blood is bringing oxygen through the maternal arteries, and that's going to drain the blood into this space within the placenta. And as the baby's arteries come into this area, it's almost like this is the lungs for the baby. The oxygen is going to diffuse from the mom's blood into the baby's blood, and the CO2 is going to diffuse from the baby's blood into the mom's blood. And then the blood returns through the umbilical artery, the umbilical vein, to the baby and provide the baby with the oxygen. And at the same time, the CO2 is going to be loaded into the blood and carried away by the maternal veins. So this place right here, this is where all the exchange happens, but it's not just this capillary bed. You can see that in the placenta, you have capillary beds all around the baby here, and creating as much surface area as possible so that the baby can do that exchange with the mom. What's also being loaded into the mom's blood is all the baby's nitrogenous waste, right? The urea that we've talked about. So moms are doing amazing things. They're doing the breathing for the baby. They're doing the eating for the baby. They're doing all the kidney function for the baby. And in addition to that, they're also supporting the baby because antibodies can actually move across this placental membrane, and that can actually give the baby some immune protection even before its adaptive immune response has a chance to be exposed. So that's a really, really cool thing with the placenta. And you should know, by the way, if you didn't know, that after the baby is born, there is a second birth, and that is the placenta right here. So once the baby comes out and they cut the umbilical cord, I don't know exactly the timing, it's like within 30 minutes or something like that, the mom has to get pushed a second time. It's a lot easier, but it's still, it's some work. She has to push this whole placenta out, and if you want to look up a picture, you can do it, but it's a bloody mass of tissue, because that's all the blood vessels that mom and baby were using for 9 months. So that's called the afterbirth. And I think most people, they just dispose it as medical waste, but there are some folks that believe that the placenta has nutritional value and contains hormones that can help with postpartum depression. So some people, you always have the option, in the hospital literally said you have to bring your own container if you want to take it home, but some people will take it home and you can send it off to a company that will dry it and ground it up into a powder that you can take as a pill. Some people cook it and eat it, it's whatever you're into, but it is part of the mom's body. So obviously the dad's not going to eat it, that'd be really weird, but if the mom were eating it, it's just, she's eating her own placenta. And actually a lot of animals do that too. It's, since there's so much nutrients in there that technically could be used. So kind of your own, whatever floats your boat kind of thing. Definitely people that are more like into the natural births and stuff, they're kind of into that placental eating, but I don't think they're going to eat it. All right, you can look through your own on the stages of fetal development and how the baby develops. This is amazing. Keep in mind, this looks like a full-grown baby, but that's just 20 weeks out of 40 weeks. So this is what my kid looked like halfway. Can't even imagine what they look like right now. It's pretty wild. But at 5 weeks here, you can see the head's already formed, the hands, feet are formed, the heart is already beating. You can see the heart right there. This is 14 weeks and this is 20 weeks. And usually 20 weeks is when you start to find out the gender. So looking at this one right here, I'm not trained at this, so I'm not going to make a call. But the doctor can look at this and know very easily if it's a male or female. Okay. Childbirth. I'll throw this in just because there's some hormones involved. I know we're going late, but guys, this is the last lecture. Just freaking give it to me, okay? So during childbirth, obviously, as you know, oxytocin plays a huge role, and here you can see that positive feedback loop, right? Oxytocin comes in, stimulates the uterus to contract. That also stimulates the placenta to release a hormone we've talked about before, and that is the prostaglandin. So prostaglandins then cause the contractions of the uterus to further squeeze. It's the same prostaglandin that's actually found in semen that causes the uterus to squeeze. And as the uterus contracts, that's going to send positive feedback back to the pituitary gland, which then causes it to release more oxytocin. And so you end up with this snowball effect that essentially causes the uterus to squeeze, and push that baby out that birth canal. And so here are the stages of that. You see the cervix has to open up and thin, and then the baby can, this is called the crowning, where the baby's head starts to come out. And then once the baby comes out, the placenta is going to have to detach, and the midwife or the nurse is actually going to help out a lot with that by actually massaging the mom's stomach to push down on the placenta to help it detach from the uterus. And that's an important step because the placenta has a lot of vascular tissue in there, right? It's highly vascularized. And in the old days, you would hear about a lot of moms that actually died during childbirth. They didn't die from the pain. They died from bleeding out. And the reason they bleed out is because they didn't really know at that time how to safely get that placenta to detach and then slow down the bleeding, okay? Because there's a lot of blood vessels that are connected there. And so there's significant bleeding that's going to happen after the birth and up to several days. So there's a big recovery process for mom after that happens. But that's basically what's happening during childbirth. Way easier, I for sure, to teach about it than to actually go through it. But that's looking to all this is looking to happen for us in the next couple of days. So it's very, very exciting. And for me, it's pretty cool to know what's going on. So that is it. That is our last talk for the year. I'm kind of sad, and I hope you've enjoyed the ride. And this doesn't mean that this is going to be the last time you see me, though. We'll definitely jump on live streams. I think we have a live stream tomorrow to introduce the sub, say hi, check in. And of course, over the next couple of weeks, as we get updates about school and grades and all that, even though I'm going to be on leave, I'll be talking to the sub, and we'll get you guys the updates on all that. I'm sure you want them. Okay, so that's it. If you have any questions about any of this, you can post a comment below, or shoot me an email, or write it down and ask me during the live stream tomorrow. It's going to be a Zoom call at 9:30, so I'll be sending out an email about a minute or two before that. I think Zoom's starting to do this waiting room thing just for security, because people have been stupid and hacking Zoom calls. So when you click on the link, it's going to put you in a waiting room, and then I have to approve people. So if you get that waiting room message, just sit there tight, and I'll keep an eye on it and make sure I let you in, and we'll have a good time together tomorrow. Okay, I hope that's helpful. Hope you enjoyed that and learned something new, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Have a great day. Bye.